What if I told you there was a punishment so terrifying, so cruel, that it made every other execution seem merciful? A torture where victims did not simply die, but slowly decayed, trapped in their bodies and fully aware of their fate. For centuries this method remained one of history's darkest secrets, spoken only in whispers. It was designed not just to kill, but to completely break a person, reducing them to something unrecognizable. This is the story of Scaphism, one of the most disturbing punishments in history. So, what actually was Scaphism? Imagine being confined inside a wooden coffin that floated on water. Your arms, legs, and head were left exposed under the burning sun. You were force-fed food and drink, not out of kindness, but to prolong your torment. This punishment, also called the boats, originated in the Persian Empire and has been described as one of the most brutal methods ever created. Victims reportedly suffered for days, sometimes weeks, before death. The term comes from the Greek word scaph, meaning boat or hollowed vessel, which reflects how it was carried out. The condemned were placed between two boats or inside a hollowed log, left to die in unimaginable agony. Scaphism was not just execution, it was a warning. Betray the empire and your suffering would be legendary. The most famous account of Scaphism comes from the historian Plutarch in his Life of Artaxerxes. He describes a Persian soldier named Mithridates who was executed this way after an act of arrogance. During the Battle of 401 BC, Artaxerxes too fought his brother Cyrus the Younger. When Cyrus was killed, Mithridates boasted that he had delivered the fatal blow. The claim contradicted Artaxerxes, who declared that he himself had slain Cyrus. The boast undermined royal authority and the punishment was severe. Mithridates was sentenced to death by Scaphism. According to Plutarch, he was confined between two boats, force-fed milk and honey, and left as insects consumed him. His suffering lasted 17 days before death finally came. Yet this account raises questions. Plutarch's description is the only detailed source that survives, and no Persian record mentions it. Some historians believe Greek writers exaggerated the method to depict Persians as barbaric. Was Scaphism real or propaganda? We cannot know for sure, but its very possibility is horrifying. Whether fully accurate or not, the thought of a mind capable of creating such cruelty is disturbing enough. Some texts even call it death by insects or torture by decay. Similar imagery appears in other cultures and even in literature like Shakespeare's Winter's Tale, showing how the idea of insects prolonging agony haunted human imagination. Another reference appears in H. Rider Haggard's novel The Ancient Allen, where a character is sentenced to death by the boats, almost identical to Plutarch's account, showing how Scaphism horrified writers for centuries. The true horror began with stripping the victim of clothes, dignity, and humanity. Naked and vulnerable, they were placed inside two boats or a hollowed tree trunk, head, arms, and legs left exposed, torso tightly trapped. There was no escape. Sealed inside, they waited, perhaps hoping for a swift death. But Scaphism was never quick. It was designed to prolong agony until the body collapsed into disease and despair. The condemned were forced-fed milk and honey, stomachs bloated painfully. What seemed like mercy was a trap. Excess milk and honey caused diarrhea, and trapped victims sat in their waste. Infections spread as their own bodies turned against them. Executioners repeated the feeding daily, ensuring they stayed alive for the unfolding torment. Honey was smeared across exposed skin, attracting flies, ants, wasps, and bees. Insects bit, stung, and crawled across helpless flesh. Flies laid eggs, maggots burrowed into wounds, and the victims felt every movement. Infections raged, sores oozed pus, and flesh blackened with rot, yet their hearts kept beating. Dehydration added torment. Exposed under the sun, skin cracked and blistered. At night cold brought violent shivering. Lips split, throats burned with thirst, but executioners offered only more milk and honey, never relief. Some victims were left near swamps where mosquitoes, leeches, and rodents attacked. Rats gnawed at fingers and toes, sometimes chewing flesh while victims still lived. Imagine the terror of feeling yourself eaten alive with no escape. Days turned into weeks as the body shut down slowly. Septic shock, exhaustion, and dehydration weakened the heart, and shallow breaths marked the end. Eventually death came, but the corpse that remained was grotesque, flesh devoured, bones showing through rotting skin. Witnesses saw not just death but the complete unmaking of a human being. This punishment originated in Persia, created to serve a greater purpose. The Achaemenid Empire, stretching from modern Turkey to India, thrived on order, discipline, and loyalty to the king. Under rulers like Cyrus the Great and Darius I, Persia became a vast empire of culture, wealth, and military strength. Yet treason was unforgivable. A single act of betrayal could unravel the empire's stability. Whether soldier deserting, noble conspiring, or general defying orders, punishment was designed not only to kill but to terrify anyone who thought of betrayal. These were not just crimes, they were threats to the survival of the empire. The Persian kings, remembered for diplomacy and tolerance, revealed a darker side when punishing defiance. Their arsenal of punishments included one that stood apart as the most sadistic and psychologically devastating: Scaphism. Unlike ordinary executions, Scaphism was reserved for traitors, deserters, and those who dared challenge the throne. A thief might lose a hand, a murderer his life, but a traitor deserved a fate worse than death. Persia's rulers were not only powerful but feared. Their laws demanded obedience and their army was built on strict loyalty. Desertion was treason, and treason meant Scaphism. Soldiers knew watching a deserter dragged away that a nightmare awaited him. Even nobles or officials in the royal court risked this fate if disloyalty was suspected. Everyone knew what Scaphism was. The mere mention struck fear into the most powerful. This was its true purpose, not just execution but psychological warfare. Betray the king and your suffering would become a warning carved into memory. While Persia is remembered for roads, culture, and tolerance, its justice system also thrived on fear. Alongside crucifixion, impalement, and being torn by animals, Scaphism proved that control was maintained through terror. It was the ultimate statement of dominance, a slow death designed to strip away humanity itself. Centuries later, Byzantine chronicler Joannes Zonaras revived the horrors in the 12th century. Drawing from Plutarch, he retold the story with vivid detail that reignited Scaphism's infamy. A former imperial officer, Zonaras was familiar with history's darkest chapters, but his account of Scaphism carried a particularly chilling edge. He explained not just the physical torment but the psychological nightmare. Scaphism was more than execution. It was a weapon of fear. Victims were not simply killed, they were turned into living warnings. Their agony stretched for days or weeks so that the very idea of the boats inspired trembling. Most executions are swift, but Scaphism forced the condemned to endure their own decay. Every hour brought deeper suffering. The stench of rot and waste surrounded them, the buzz of flies and writhing maggots filled their ears. They felt everything, yet could do nothing. The slow death stripped away dignity. Forced fed like animals, trapped in filth, unable to swat away creatures feeding on their flesh, they were reduced to less than human in their own eyes and in those of onlookers. And yes, there were always people watching. Scaphism was never hidden away. It was often performed in public so that anyone passing by could witness the suffering. People stared at the writhing figure, whispering how long they might last. Some pitied, others looked on with morbid curiosity, but everyone left with fear carved into their memory. One of the most disturbing aspects was the role of the executioners. Unlike a beheading or hanging where death was swift, Scaphism required constant effort. The victim had to be force-fed daily, smeared with fresh honey, and kept alive to prolong the torment. Imagine the horror of someone maintaining suffering deliberately. But was it truly that bad? The answer is yes. It was so brutal that it inspired other infamous punishments across history. The Romans perfected crucifixion, where victims were beaten, stripped, and nailed to wooden crosses, left to endure exhaustion, dehydration, and agony for days. Crucifixion, like Scaphism, was not just punishment but a warning. Yet even crucifixion lacked what made Scaphism unique. In crucifixion the body perished as human. In Scaphism the victim was transformed into something less than human, consumed by insects and decay until unrecognizable. Beyond Rome, similar methods appeared elsewhere. In medieval Japan, criminals were tied to stakes in swamps or left in bamboo cages, where insects and elements slowly finished them. The design was humiliation as much as death, echoing the essence of Scaphism. Even in the 20th century, its horror resurfaced. During World War II, Japan's Unit 731 carried out human experiments with flesh-eating insects, infecting prisoners, leaving them in swampy conditions, and exposing them to creatures that consumed them alive. It was psychological torture that mirrored Scaphism, keeping victims alive while they awaited certain death. Yet despite these later cruelties, none surpassed the nightmare of Scaphism. Crucifixion ended eventually, exposure killed with less deliberation, and even Unit 731's horrors were experiments, not public punishments meant to strip away body and dignity. Scaphism was in a category of its own. It was not just death, but transformation into living rot. The condemned became breeding grounds for decay, stripped of humanity and dignity before witnesses. This was not simply an execution, it was calculated destruction of body and soul. Scaphism was the ultimate nightmare, the most disturbing punishment ever devised. For those who knew of it, the very word became terror itself.